People assume osteoarthritis, joint pain, joint stiffness is chalked up to getting older. At 40, my back should hurt. At 40, I'm not able to hike as long. Some people are like, oh, I'm getting older and they're in their 30s. I think we use it as an excuse a lot. I'm just getting old. I know sometimes it's just meant to be a joke, but the amount of times you hear that, no matter what somebody's age is, it's kind of alarming. It just blows my mind, the amount of just acceptance and just ignoring the symptoms and not really doing anything about it. They just, pop a few ibuprofen, they get the braces, they get the medications, all the sports gels, and go on about their day. I think that is also a huge part of the stereotype we've built as a society around arthritis, around essentially becoming decrepit as you get older. That is certainly not the case. 90% of people that have arthritis have some degree of lifestyle influence. People are like, food impacts my joint pain? I had no idea. It really flies under the radar a lot of times because people think, I have arthritis, it's a joint problem, I have knee arthritis, I need to work my knee. What are you fueling your body with, and is it quality? Oh, I just had a few pieces of candy, it's not a big deal. That can also start to add up. Focusing on the factors you can control is so incredibly important.
Alyssa, I'd like to focus this conversation on joint pain, how people get arthritis in the first place, how to reduce pain and stiffness, but just to get everyone on the same page, because I feel like people throw the word arthritis out there often and it kind of gets muddled. How do you define arthritis?
So arthritis is typically viewed as a cluster of symptoms. The symptoms typically include stiffness in the morning, joint pain, swelling, and some form of instability or weakness. Osteoarthritis is the most common form of arthritis, and it typically impacts larger joints, and it starts usually on one side. So for example, knee, hip, spine are the common areas. Now, of course, you can have it in your hands, feet, and ankles in those smaller joints, but it's not necessarily as common. It can start on one side, but then it can actually move to the other side or move to different joints because due to the common symptoms of pain, stiffness, swelling, it can change the way that you move, which then can impact other joints. And then when it comes to the age, it typically tends to come a little bit later in life, but they are actually starting to diagnose it younger and younger, I think, as they learn more about it. And then honestly, if you're diagnosed younger, it can be helpful because you can start taking precautions and start taking, following some of the treatment plans then, so you can prevent it down the road, prevent it from getting worse, etc. And then they also look at an image. So like an X-ray or an MRI, typically, you'll see narrowing of the joint space. You'll see maybe some cartilage loss, but it is a combination of the image and the symptoms to reach a diagnosis. You cannot just look at an image. You should not just look at an image and say, yes, this is osteoarthritis, because you have to look at the symptoms. People can have osteoarthritis on their X-ray or image and not experience symptoms at all.
What do you mean by that? Like bone on bone?
Bone on bone, or like the joint space narrowing, changes in your cartilage, etc. Like you can have some of those changes, and a lot of those changes can be viewed as normal. Osteoarthritis comes into play when you start having these other symptoms.
Yeah.
But a lot of people get surgery based on what their image looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of gray area when it comes to kind of making that decision, but you have to look at the whole picture and not just what your image says.
And does arthritis happen just from wear and tear, or how does it manifest? Is it genetics? How does it happen to people?
So the difficult part, but also the good news, is it's a combination. So it was once believed that osteoarthritis was just simply caused by wear and tear. You've done too much activity when you were younger, maybe you worked a manual labor job, and you've essentially worn out your joints. Now you have arthritis and are dealing with these symptoms. But actually, there is another layer on top of that. And the reason I say it's good news is because if you've worn out your joints, I mean, you can't really do anything about it. You reach a point where it's like, okay, I need a joint replacement. But
Mhm.
if somebody gets a joint replacement, they can still have pain.
Mhm.
So, how does that work? I mean, ideally, you'd get a new joint and all of your problems would be gone.
Mhm.
So, there's another layer where inflammation, a big buzzword lately, can play a role in the pathogenesis or the, kind of initiation activation of osteoarthritis. And inflammation comes from a wide variety of things. Typically, these things are not necessarily addressed in a medical appointment, and these are lifestyle behaviors. And the good news is you can control a large majority of these. Sleep quality, the amount of sleep you're getting, how good it is, can actually increase your sensitivity to pain if it is poor. The types of foods that you eat can contribute to inflammation. The amount of activity you do, too much or too little, can actually increase inflammation. And so it's all about finding that balance. Food and movement can have a lot of power in pain relief, reducing stiffness, like headaches, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And then stress. Those are kind of the big four that I typically tend to migrate towards when you're looking at preventing pain, preventing osteoarthritis, managing symptoms, etc. And then, of course, genetics plays a role as well, but you can't necessarily do anything about that. So it's focusing on the factors you can control, which in large part are these lifestyle factors. Now, one thing that I typically find in a lot of patients that have osteoarthritis is there is some degree of muscle weakness, but also muscle asymmetry, meaning, one side is stronger than the other, or maybe one hip is tighter than the other, et cetera, et cetera. Asymmetries do play a large role, which is why strength training is very important, and movement training, adding variety to your movement, all can be helpful in a lot of different aspects of osteoarthritis.
So one of the things you said is that they're diagnosing it earlier and that maybe it's
Mhm.
because people are able to detect it more and we just know more about it. But I'm wondering, they say there's statistics out there that the average American, or 33% of Americans, get regular movement. 67% don't. Most
Mhm.
people, there's stats that 75% of Americans are obese or diabetic. And so I can't help but think that our lifestyle has changed dramatically over the years.
Oh,
So maybe
sure.
we're able to detect it earlier, but even still, a lot of us aren't moving. We're not eating the right kinds of things. We're not sleeping as much. We have a lot more stress. And so for you, I mean, it's just a guess, but what would be your guess as to what percentage of people nowadays have arthritis due to lifestyle factors versus the genetics or the wear and tear?
I would say the answer is hard just because, like I said, it's a combination of things. Now, certainly, obesity plays a role in inflammation as well. The more fat cells you have, the more inflammation that you have. And then diabetes is also a big one. Uncontrolled blood sugars can actually increase inflammation. You can kind of fall into insulin resistance, and that can also impact your joint pain, impact your stiffness. I think the biggest thing to look at here is people assume osteoarthritis, joint pain, joint stiffness is chalked up to getting older, and it's inevitable. That, the amount of people I hear, even people that are my age, that, they get joint pain and, oh, I'm just getting old. And then they just, pop a few ibuprofen and go on about their day.
Mhm.
And I mean, it just blows my mind the amount of just acceptance and just kind of ignoring the symptoms and not really doing anything about it. I think that is also a huge part of kind of the stereotype we've built as a society around arthritis, around just essentially becoming decrepit as you get older. And that is certainly not the case. But I do think just accepting it also plays a role in even some, younger people that have these symptoms, just tend to ignore it and move on, and then they get worse,
Yeah, it becomes the
getting
new norm.
worse. Yes, yes. So I mean, I honestly would say a large majority of people with arthritis has some sort of influence from lifestyle factors, because even if, say, your arthritis was 100% genetic, and I don't know if you could really even test that, but if it was a 100% genetic, there's obviously different severities of arthritis. You could have very mild arthritis and it doesn't even impact you very much. You can have severe symptoms of severe pain, severe stiffness, and that increase in severity could come down to lifestyle factors. So I would say probably 90% of people that have arthritis have some degree, even, I mean, almost everyone have some degree of lifestyle influence, whether it was you know, being diagnosed with osteoarthritis or just your experience with the symptoms.
Yeah. How can someone prevent getting arthritis? Like I know for me as a young person or younger person, there were times where my knee pain was so bad. And I blamed it because I was a track and field athlete. I did hurdles. And so I said, oh, my knees are just going to be this way forever. It's inevitable because I was a track athlete. But then I was also drinking tons of alcohol and eating pizza and donuts and brownies and hot Cheetos. And I removed a lot of the processed foods and I found a lot of relief in my joint pains. So I think certain plant foods were contributing as well. But for you, if someone's looking for, hey, I don't want to get arthritis when I'm older, or I currently have it, how can I alleviate some of these symptoms? What for you are the steps that people can take to prevent arthritis?
So I actually have a video on how to prevent arthritis. And you mentioned being a track athlete. I think the hard part about doing a sport is a lot of times it's a lot of volume. Like if you go to a track meet, and they don't do a lot of strength training.
Sure.
So this also can fall in the sense of people who really like walking, people who really like running, and that's all they do.
Yeah.
You're getting a lot of movement in the same direction. So I imagine that when you started strength training, now I'm sure knee pain carried over into a couple of different movements if it's still perseverated that long. But I can imagine that now that you're doing, certain exercises, permitting, what type of exercises that you're doing, I mean, you don't necessarily deal with a lot of joint pain anymore.
Mhm.
And I mean, focusing on nutrition, of course, is a large part of that. But what I find a lot of times is people tend to overestimate the amount of activity they're doing. I cannot tell you how many times people email me or people, respond and say, well, I'm really active. Because to some people, being active is going out and running errands every day.
Mhm.
You're walking around, sure. Or being active is maybe walking 20 minutes a day, and then maybe you're doing 2 walks a day. So we kind of have to dive into like, what is active? Because again, you are looking at that repetitive motion. Walking does not strength train. It's great for a lot of other things, including cardio, managing blood sugars, etc., but it does not strengthen your bones. Or I'm sorry, well, it doesn't strengthen your bones, but it doesn't strengthen your muscles either. And so you have to do something that is going to strengthen your muscles to help support your joints and to optimize your movement. I have a lot of people who just play pickleball. Say they play pickleball 3 or 4 hours a day. I'm active, but are you doing strength training? Are you supplementing that with something else? Running. Sure, it's bringing some impact, but it's the same movement over and over and over again, which is why I harp a lot of times on even just moving sideways and backwards can be a great place to start, especially if you love walking, can be a great place to start to incorporate some more variety. But strength training is one thing that so many people are missing. And if you're doing something like walking or playing pickleball or playing sports or running and you don't strength train, odds are you're going to be dealing with joint pain or an injury at some point because there's a big gap
Mhm.
in that training that strength training 2 or 3 times a week can be incredibly helpful in preventing arthritis and managing symptoms. Now, that being said, not all strength training is the same. So it kind of just adds another layer of you want to make sure you're getting variety. There are a lot of people who kind of fall into a routine they're comfortable with. Every time I go to the gym on Tuesday, I'm doing bicep curls, a couple of machines and some other movement. Great. But if you're not making it hard, if you're not constantly changing things up, then
Mhm.
you might not be getting the benefit that you think you are.
Mhm.
And so it's really strengthening is so incredibly important, but so many people are missing it. And I think a big reason for that is people just don't know what to do,
Yeah.
or they do something and they get injured, which I totally understand. I mean, it can be, daunting if you don't know much about fitness or strength training. It can be hard to kind of figure out what to do. So I'm trying to fill that gap with people with arthritis, especially if you're just kind of starting from ground zero or dealing with pain, etc. Now, food plays a huge role. Really flies under the radar a lot of times because people think I have arthritis, it's a joint problem, I have knee arthritis, I need to work my knee. But then all those other lifestyle factors kind of again fly under the radar. And so people are like, food impacts my joint pain? I had no idea because it's not super intuitive to know that. But yes, absolutely, because it contributes to inflammation and then can make things worse. And even with arthritis, sometimes people are sensitive to certain foods. So sometimes increases in joint pain can be tied to a general food of, obviously not eating the things that you probably know aren't good for you. That's simply where I start is eat foods that you know are good for you. I think a lot of times people are eating something they know it's not good, and then it can increase joint pain. And sugar, I mean, processed sugar, high fructose corn syrup is one of them. But I think addressing both of these are big, big players, and then you can get into some of the other ones. But food and movement are two of the biggest ones.
So we'll circle back to the food part, but with movement still, I would think people would think that if they have knee pain, for example, they wouldn't want to do walking, they wouldn't want to do squats, they wouldn't want to do any sort of activity that's going to be putting stress on the knee, and that it would make it worse. What do you say to that?
I get it. But since osteoarthritis is not tied only to wear and tear, exercise actually stimulates the cartilage. And I'll get to, well, I don't have any cartilage. So I like to think about it as your cartilage is like a sponge. So when you dip a sponge into water and you don't squeeze it, it doesn't really absorb anything, the water or whatever liquid it's in. But if you squeeze it, it absorbs all the water liquid. Movement works in that same way. Making your joints move essentially can squeeze that sponge, that cartilage, allow it to absorb those nutrients, and then it expels them. And then that's how your cartilage gets fed, gets those nutrients. So without movement, without that stress, without that mobility, your cartilage isn't getting the nutrients that it needs. So movement is actually helpful. That being said, there probably are movements that don't feel great. So it's finding a balance of movement that actually feels good. So you don't necessarily want to do movements that flare up pain. Now, I know that's much easier said than done. Take for example, squats. Squats get a bad rap when you have knee pain, knee arthritis, because they typically don't feel good. There are tons of ways to do squats. Squats are an inevitable part of life. If you get up from the couch, if you use the toilet, if you get in and out of the car, you are doing a squat, which is why it always kind of blows my mind that people are told to avoid squats. You can't. So you make them feel better. And I actually have a video of like the 10 squat variations because there are tons of different ways to do it. So meet yourself where you're at, say standing up from a really high surface like a bed,
Mhm.
starting to work there. There are lots of different ways you can make it easier.
Mhm.
Start there and then build yourself up. It is so important that you work your entire body and not just focus on the knee. You should certainly work the knee because if you have knee arthritis, because you want to maintain that mobility, you want to strengthen those muscles around the knee. But there's lots of research that shows how the hip impacts the knee. So a lot of times people then are only focusing on the knee and then neglect the hip, neglect other important muscles and still have knee pain. They're like, I'm working my knee, but I still have pain. Because odds are there's something up or down the chain of your body that is impacting. So you have to work the entire body. You cannot just focus on the joint that is painful. And I think that's a big misconception because you go to physical therapy. I have knee arthritis. They're likely only working on your knee partly because they're limited by insurance, but you can't just focus on the painful joint. You have to look at different parts of your body as well.
I can't help but think that, or I have a lot of clients too, where it's hard to motivate them to want to move because let's say they have a lot more weight or they have the joint pain. And so to think about movement sounds so painful. And often it is in the beginning as well. And I know for myself, the more I don't move, the more I sink into my chair and become a couch potato. I get exhausted from not moving. That to think about exercising, I'm like, I can't, I'm so tired. And the more I move, the better I feel and the easier it is to move. And so sometimes it's just that initial hurdle of getting like, hey, you just got to start and you just got to start doing it. Because, like if we were talking about the knees, then I would think it's helping push out some of the inflammation and getting more blood flow and just getting things moving again. Whereas if we just, I shouldn't move it because it's in pain, then it just concretes it more.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah,
Yes.
that too.
Well, and I think that's also another big misconception with movement is, oh, well, I don't have time or the energy or the motivation to do a 30-minute workout. I'll just skip it today. When in reality, something is better than nothing, but it does not have to be 30 or 60 minutes. And this is something that, I fell into a trap too of like, well, if I can't exercise for 90 minutes, then it's not a good workout or it's not doing anything. Which is why I have been trying to lower the barrier of entry to a lot of different simple movements that you can do sitting on the couch watching TV, that you can do 2 minutes before you go out for a walk that can help in a lot of these different areas because like you said, I mean, the hardest part's getting started. But once you do something, like say stepping side to side, easy one if you're waiting for something to cook or you just find yourself standing in line, moving side to side. And then you're like, oh, this actually feels pretty good. Then it's like, okay, I know that I can feel better even just by doing something simple. Now I'm going to start incorporating this a little bit more, even if it's just a couple of minutes a day. Then you can start to build habits.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the gateways into opening the doors to exercise and having people actually get started because you see a video online, or maybe you even go to physical therapy or you go to a personal trainer and they start you on really hard exercises, or maybe they're not as well versed in the joint that's impacting you. And then you experience a lot of pain. And when you do that, it's like, well, I'm going to have a lot of pain. Why would I continue to do this? Which I totally understand. So I think a lot of people are blown away at the impact, just very simple things. Even you just sitting right there, moving your legs, kicking your legs straight out in front of you a few times can be a great way to get some blood flowing, reduce some of that stiffness, and then make, getting up easier or moving around. So don't discount something because it looks easy or it looks simple, especially when you're just getting started or you're dealing with pain. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be super intense to be effective.
And so once someone's kind of done these more easier at home steps of, okay, I'm going to step side to side. I'm going to kick my legs out or lift my heels up on my tippy toes when I'm sitting down in my chair. What would be your next step for somebody who's like, okay, I'm ready to take the next step. I just don't know what should I be lifting weights? Should I be doing kettlebells? Should I be using resistance bands? Do I have to be doing stair stepper? Like what for that person who's like, I don't even know how to start. What are your levels?
So I think first question is, what do you like to do? Because there isn't necessarily a certain formula that's like, okay, on day 7, you need to lift, X amount of weight. And on day 10, you need to do these certain exercises. It really comes down to what you like to do. If you want to go into the gym and find exercises there, great. There are so many options for you. And it comes down to your strength, what joints are impacting you, your mobility, etc. If you want to use kettlebells, there are tons of options for that. If you like swimming, there are tons of options for that. So it really comes down to, what will you do?
Yes.
Because that's the most important part. Then from there, it's finding the right movements, strengthening the right muscles, which is why my membership just kind of takes people through that and gradually progresses. One of the biggest things that holds a lot of people back, kind of what I mentioned earlier about kind of falling into a comfortable routine, is you have to continue to make the movements challenging. If you don't, and kind of stick to the movements that feel easy, you likely are not going to be building the muscle that you think you are. Now, these simple, easier exercises can be great for helping to relieve pain, helping to improve blood flow as warm-ups, cool downs, etc. But if you're looking to actually build muscle, but you are going to the gym or even just working out at home and you're using the same 5-pound weights every single day, you're likely not going to build muscle, or it's going to be minimal compared to what you could be doing if you increase the weight. Now, increasing weight is not the only way to make something harder. You can increase the speed. You can increase the depth. Say for like a squat. If you squat even lower, that can increase the difficulty. So it's not always about lifting weights. Certainly it's helpful, but there are other ways that you can make things hard. Resistance bands is another good one. There are a lot of options. So don't think you just have to go into the gym and lift all this weight in order to be effective, but it's progressing in a way of reducing rest time or making the workouts longer, making them more intense. So there are a lot of variables, which can be overwhelming, sure, but it's essentially, finding someone you trust, I think, is a big part of it to help you progress if you don't feel confident enough to do it on your own.
I like to think of it like driving a car. When you first drive a car, I remember they told me to like look in the rear view mirror like pretty frequently. You just glance up and just see what's behind you. And I always thought, how am I going to look in the rear view mirror when I'm supposed to be looking ahead and making sure nothing's happening that I'm going to drive into? And then you have to also make sure you're doing your windshield wipers and your blinker and it was just seemed like a lot of different moving parts and pieces. And so same thing with exercise. You're like, what? I have to focus on my reps, but also my breathing, but also the movement and how I'm flexing my muscle. And it just seems like a lot, but over time, it just starts becoming a natural habit. When you get in your car, you don't even think about it. You just drive.
Yes. And a large part of it is just being aware of how your body moves and trying to prevent certain compensations and like, oh, that's how I should be doing it. Certainly you can start to build those habits, start to understand more about how your body moves, how much recovery time you need, how many repetitions is too much. Because like for me, when I go to the gym, like I don't even really think about like the weight I'm using because I'm used to, how my body responds to certain weights, if a workout is going to be hard or not for me, just because of the movements that are in it. So it certainly can become second nature, but it's essentially learning quality information first and then building habits on top of that.
If you're finding value in this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up because that way this information reaches more people. And I'd like to thank today's sponsor of the video, Element Electrolytes, which is a drink mix I've used every day for several years now, which has the science-backed ratios of sodium, magnesium, and potassium that can help our cells hold on to more water and hydration, and therefore it can help with people having heart palpitations, eye twitching, muscle cramping, fatigue, low energy, migraine. And so if you're looking for a really clean ingredient brand for electrolytes with no sugar, no artificial ingredients, then these are a super convenient option to getting in more of the essential minerals that our body needs. You'll find a link in the video description where you can get 8 free additional packets of all of Element's different flavors with any order, or you can get those 8 free packets by going to the URL drinkelement.com/Lillie Kane, and they do offer a money back guarantee too, so if you try it and you don't like it, you can get your money back. And my last question about movement, because I find a lot of people, they may not want to move because it sounds hard and it's taking time out of their day, and they had a really busy day at work, and then they have to take care of the kids, and then they've got so many things going on that it's like the last thing they want to do is think about strength training, especially as a woman. That sounds like, whoa, I'm going to turn into Arnold Schwarzenegger with huge muscles as soon as I lift a dumbbell. Yes. But in general, how would you speak to me as somebody who's like, yeah, no, I hear you. I get it. I know I should move, but I'm not going to actually do it. So how do you motivate me? What do you say to that person who is like not motivated yet to want to do it on their own?
So actually I had this conversation the other day with somebody at pickleball who, was like, oh, I know what I need to do. I just won't do it.
Yeah.
Even I have all the time in the world and I still don't do it. And simply stand up from the couch 10 times during a commercial break, up and down. I mean, a modified squat, but better than nothing. Or walk sideways down the hallway when you're going to bed. I mean, I just did a video on osteoporosis exercises, which is bone strengthening, and how to incorporate them into your daily routine. So if you are standing there waiting for something to cook on the stove, in the microwave, whatever, making coffee, add in 20 heel raises where you're just lifting up on your heels and then coming down, working the calf muscles. There are lots of different ways that you can very easily fit just a few repetitions into your daily routine. Like sometimes when I'm on vacation and don't have a lot of time to do things, I'll just do like 10 or 20 push-ups on the, bathroom sink. There are lots of different ways that you can just sneak it in. That again, it doesn't have to be this 10-minute continuous thing. It doesn't have to be 30, 60 minutes. That movement will start to accumulate over time, especially if you're kind of starting at that baseline of not doing much movement at all. It can really start to add up. Then, of course, you do ideally want to make it more challenging, but starting there, I think, is one of the best places and one of the easiest ways to help make it a habit. Like if you're going to get up and go to the kitchen, instead of just standing up once, stand up 5 times or 10 times, as long as you're not in a rush. Just take these simple activities and add a little bit more.
But why? Why should I do that? Why do you move every day? Why do you care about movement?
There are a few things. So preventing, especially if you are dealing with pain, preventing stiffness, making sure that you are essentially bulletproofing your body to not deal with a lot of this stuff later in life, I think is a big role. I move because I like to play pickleball. I like to walk my dog. I like to hike. And if I don't, I will likely experience pain doing any or all of those things. Mm-hmm. So that is a big role. Now, of course, like aesthetically, it can also be helpful. It can help with weight loss if that's one of the goals that you have. As much as I hate it, toning up, certain things that can obviously be a big motivator for a lot of people too. So it kind of just depends on, what your why is. If you have kids, if you have a dog, if you have grandparents that you've seen kind of fall victim to different health conditions, preventing that. If, say, a condition like diabetes or obesity runs in your family, then movement will obviously play a large role in helping to prevent that. So, the motivators are different depending on the person. But I get so many emails about like, I just want to be there for my grandkids, be there for my kids, and not have to just sit on the bench while they're playing or doing whatever. The motivators are there. You just have to figure out if for you, those motivators are large enough to get started.
Totally. I feel like that's the main question I have with a lot of people is most people know they should eat right and they should move and they should sleep,
Sure.
but they haven't honed in enough on like why are they doing this? Because
Yes.
especially if you're a younger person, then you definitely are like, oh, I'm invincible. I can do whatever
Yes.
I want. And then a lot of people think that, and then they are now 70, like we both just went to Europe. And when I was on my trip, we were a part of a tour group, and so many of the older people, they had to use a cane and they needed help off the bus and they couldn't stand, they couldn't go up the stairs. They were missing out on seeing some of the sights that I was able to see because they're like, I can't hike down to go and see that thing. So I spent all of this money to go on this vacation, and yet I'm missing out on half the things because I'm not physically capable of doing it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to rely on somebody to have to take care of me one day. I don't want to have to worry about all the several medications and all the things that are going on. And even as somebody who's a younger person who still can see the bigger picture, the long-term vision that I think so many of us forget because they're in the present moment right now. I want the cookie, I want the cake, I want to watch TV. And we just get so focused on right now versus our future 80-year-old, 90-year-old self.
Even 40, 50. I mean, there are so many people, again, who view it as inevitable that, at 40, my back should hurt, or at 40, I am not able to hike as long, or, something like that. And it's really kind of starting to stem younger and younger that, old is now, some people are like, oh, I'm getting older and they're in their 30s. So it's just, I think we use it as an excuse a lot of, I'm just getting old. I know sometimes it's just meant to be a joke, but the amount of times you hear that, no matter what somebody's age is, it's kind of alarming. So I think people chalk it up to, well, this is just how I'm supposed to be. This is just something I have to deal with. They get the braces, they get the, medications, all the sports gels, a lot of things before they actually try movement. And so diving into that, what is motivating you and is one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. Again, getting started is the hardest part. But once you get started, hopefully you get very consistent with it. Like I've been going to the gym 4 or 5 times a week for 10 years. And so I know that if I don't, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to start to feel bad. I'm going to start to, in my terms, feel like fluffy. If I haven't like lifted in a while, my muscles just feel kind of fluffy. So there are a lot of these like adverse things that I've kind of trained myself. Okay, this is even when I go on vacation and come home and it's like, okay, I need to get back to the gym because I know how good it will feel. Consistency is, of course, key, but it's kind of getting that initial buy-in, and that a big part of that comes from like the movements that you're doing in either the classes you go to or whatever your primary form of exercise is.
And when you had mentioned nutrition can play a role into someone having more inflammation or blood sugar issues or more joint pain as a whole, what are the specific inflammatory foods or foods that you definitely would say contribute towards arthritis?
One of the big things that I start out with is high fructose corn syrup. And if you look at just the foods that you eat in a daily routine, look at just the ingredients to see if there's high fructose corn syrup in it, because unfortunately it's in a lot of different foods. That can play such a big role. People ask me all the time, like, what should I be eating specifically? Like, what do I need to avoid? What do I need to include? And honestly, it doesn't necessarily come down to like exercise. There are a lot of different variations, a lot of different ways to do things. There's not, you need to eat strawberries at 3 p.m. and, this at 5 p.m., this much meat. Like there's a lot of different ways to do it. But it's coming down to what are you fueling your body with, and is it quality? Because when you look at someone's daily diet, if they're eating, say, ice cream or, a piece of candy here and there, or different things that aren't great for you. And then they're like, well, what are these anti-inflammatory foods? What should I be including or what should I be avoiding? it kind of falls into the category of like, well, fruit has a lot of sugar in it. Should I avoid that? And it's like, okay, before we start cutting out like whole foods or like nightshades get kind of a bad rap in people with arthritis because some people can be sensitive to like peppers and tomatoes and potatoes. But it's like, again, before we start cutting out like whole foods, let's look at some of the other things that you're consuming first because they're including a lot of things that they might not realize. I think one thing we overestimate the amount of exercise that we get, and I think we underestimate the amount of food you're eating or like the I don't want to say bad, but like the some of the more harmful foods, etc. Like, oh, I just had a few pieces of candy, it's not a big deal, when that can also start to add up. And also protein is something that people are wildly under consuming. And so typically I just start with eating quality foods. Like I said, a lot of times what you're eating is not great for you, but protein is also a big one, especially women, older women, like 50 and up, don't get a lot of protein.
Mm-hmm.
And so focusing on that can also be very helpful in driving your nutritional choices and kind of preventing that inflammation. So instead of focusing just on like specific foods, it comes down to, again, what you like, what works best for you, what will you stick with, quality and protein focus.
Yeah, like you said, I feel like there's so many different ways to eat to be healthy, and that people can get overwhelmed and confused because they want to do it the perfect way. But I
And
think
there's not a perfect way.
And I think no matter if you talk to a vegan, a carnivore, a keto, a Mediterranean, a paleo, pretty much everybody can agree that the ultra processed junk foods, like if you're having Pop Tarts, waffles, and cheesecake for breakfast, it's probably not in your best interest. And so most people can agree, let's just get rid of the ultra processed junk foods. So if someone's having, oh yeah, for lunch I usually have nachos and a Pepsi, it's like, well, if you're telling me you have joint pain and you're having skin issues and you're having weight gain and you're having blood sugar issues and headaches, like let's look at your food. And if it has multiple ingredients on this one package, it's probably not serving you in the best way. And then like you said, so that's kind of my two ways to build a diet. One, get rid of the processed junk foods. Two, eat more protein. After that, you are like, you can kind of pick and choose. Maybe you do better with fruits. Maybe you like more vegetables. Maybe you do good with the meat heavy diet. But most people aren't eating enough protein, like you said. And so I try to push, like if we can get more protein in, inevitably, people tend to eat less of the ultra processed foods because they're more full.
Yes.
So for you, how do you recommend protein intake? Is there like a 1 gram per pound of body weight? Is there like, no, just however you do it, 4 ounces at a meal? Or what do you recommend anyone for protein? Just
one thing that I find very eye-opening, because again, we typically overestimate the amount of protein that you're getting. So if you actually look at what you eat just in a regular day, if say tomorrow, you are just going to eat how you usually do, don't change anything, but just look at the protein on everything you eat and just write down the number. I ate a yogurt, 10 grams of protein, write it down, and then add it up at the end of the day. Because you might be surprised. You might say, oh, yeah, I'm easily getting, 50 or, 70 grams. I eat a high protein diet. But then you look at it and it's like, oh, I'm getting like 30 grams throughout the day or something like that. So I think that's first starting there, because you can't just say, there's maybe a goal of say like 100 grams of protein or something. Typically, if you look at like a gram per pound of body weight, that might be a good goal. So say, somebody's goal is 120 grams of protein, but they're getting like 30. I mean, that's obviously a big difference. So then it's looking to add maybe 10 grams of protein to your day.
Yep.
Once you feel comfortable there, because obviously it can be a little uncomfortable to add like a ton of protein. Typically, I like to start where you're at as far as what you're getting, and then let's increase it from there, aiming for maybe a goal of a gram per pound of body weight, or, even just starting off with like 80 to 100 grams a day might be that's probably a good goal for a lot of people, because it also impacts muscle growth. Not like you said that a lot of people think that, once you start lifting and you're eating protein, you're going to, look like this crazy muscular person. And quite honestly, I wish it was that easy, but it is not. Trust me. Like I said, I've been doing it for like 10 years and this is about as good as it gets for me. So do not fear that. But if you're not getting enough protein, but you're doing all of the strength training and you're not really seeing results, that could be part of it.
So what for you are the foods then that are the anti-inflammatory foods, or the foods that, for people, they're like, okay, I'm going to try to get rid of the processed foods, but what do I bring in? I don't know what I'm supposed to be eating then.
There are a lot of things that kind of fall into this anti-inflammatory, good for you section. I mean, I eat eggs every single day. I eat yogurt every single day. I do like cheese, but so I eat, a lot of dairy products and fruit, like a lot of berries and citrus fruits can have some anti-inflammatory components. Fatty fish, including salmon, or there are other options, but salmon is kind of a big one. Broccoli can have great anti-inflammatory properties. But there are surprisingly a lot of foods that fall into that category. It depends on your body. Everybody's different. So finding out if you have sensitivities to some of those things and then working with those things accordingly. Nutrition's hard just because there's so much information out there, but ultimately comes down to what feels good to you.
So for someone who has arthritis, what are things that they would do today that can start alleviating pain? Just as a summary.
Try to accumulate 5 to 10 minutes of movement per day that feels good. Accumulate, meaning it can just be a short burst. 30 seconds here when you're cooking something, 30 seconds there, 2 minutes before bed, etc. Accumulate 10 to 15 minutes per day for these next 7 days. Then take an average day that food you typically eat, and see if there's one substitution that you can make, whether that's ice cream 2 or 3 times a week, or having the candy at your desk, or whatever it is. See if there's one substitution that you can make. And I think just simply starting there can be helpful. Now, if you do want to add in just one other thing, give yourself a chance of getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Now, I recognize it is not always feasible. I don't have kids, so, there are a lot of factors that play into sleep and your work schedule, etc. But if you are simply not getting enough sleep because, you're staying up late watching TV, or you're reading a good book or something like that, give yourself a chance to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Those 3 things can be a great start in helping to reduce pain.
You'll find links in the video description to Alyssa's popular YouTube channel, her Instagram, Adventure Alive, and all of her social media platforms in the video description. I hope you guys have a happy day, and I'll see you in the next one.